So as Colleen said, our mission here today is to talk about what do we know about the effectiveness of counseling. But before we get there, I want to back up and remind us what we're talking about when we talk about housing counseling. Because right now there's a lot of focus on foreclosure mitigation counseling, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. And I also want to talk broadly about what the HUD support for housing counseling is and what the housing counseling universe is. Right now there's a lot of emphasis on telephone counseling, which has been vital in being able to ramp up to serve as many people as we had to. But there's also a large presence at the street level, and it's important not to forget that as well. So to start off with the housing counseling overview. So I'm going to draw upon a report I was involved with a couple of years ago when I was at Apt Associates that we did for HUD, which I would recommend to people, called The State of the Housing Counseling Industry. It's a couple of years old now. A lot has changed in the last few years, but I think it provides a very good overview of the industry and the agencies providing it and what kind of services they provide. At that time, there were over 1,800 HUD-approved counseling agencies spread around the country. They were present in about a third of counties. Those counties where they were present accounted for 4/5 of the country's population. HUD has had a mission of supporting housing counseling since it was founded. It was part of its original mandate. And that mission has grown over time to the point where it now supports, through its approval and through funding, a wide range of counseling agencies across the country. HUD support, however, is not the only support. Agencies draw upon a lot of different funding sources, but still HUD grants are the first or second most important source of funding for nearly half of agencies and about 55% of small agencies. So we're really talking about a broad network of organizations across the country. It's also important to remember that housing counseling serves disproportionately most disadvantaged families and individuals. In the country as a whole, about a third of households make less than 50% of area median income, but 45% of those counseled are at that income level. All told, about 3/4 of households who receive counseling make less than 80% of area median income. Again, it's about half of all households. And so we're really aiming assistance at those who are the most vulnerable members of society. And in terms of minorities, a large share of those receiving housing counseling are African American or Latino, people who are, particularly on the home ownership side, people who are new to home ownership. That assistance in understanding the process to get over the hump is vital. And so really this is an important service aimed at an important segment of our society. The other thing to bear in mind is when we talk about counseling is it's not just foreclosure mitigation counseling. This chart shows trends over time going back to the early 90s and the number of people assisted receiving rental housing counseling assistance. That's assistance in trying to find housing that's affordable, assistance in navigating housing subsidy programs, assistance with mediation with landlords, and also fair housing issues. And for a long time, that was the most common form of housing counseling. It was nearly 400,000 for a number of years. Over the course of the 90s, the light blue line shows pre-purchase counseling. And as we had more emphasis on trying to help people achieve home ownership, one of the primary means that was acted through, actually that's the light blue line, it's the orange line, was through support for pre-purchase counseling. And so by the mid-2000s, that had become as common as rental housing counseling. Post-purchase counseling, which includes delinquency counseling as well as reverse mortgage counseling, counseling around refinance decisions and home maintenance questions, had in the early 90s been an important part of counseling. It had been overshadowed by pre-purchase counseling. But again, we saw over the course of the 2000s more clients receiving post-purchase counseling. And then finally, there's also people who are dealing with homelessness and trying to find shelter that are also an important segment of the population who receive housing counseling. So when we talk about support for housing counseling, it's not just about foreclosure. It's about people trying to find rental housing, people trying to buy a home, and people trying to find shelter. Now, this was the picture that happened through 2006, and then what happened after that was the foreclosure crisis. And as you can see, that light blue line went through the roof. The number of people receiving post-purchase counseling quadrupled from about 400,000 to 1.6 million. And so obviously now when we think about counseling, we think about those services because that's predominating. The other types of services haven't gone away. Obviously, pre-purchase counseling has gone down for obvious reasons. Rental counseling has also gone down at a time when we have affordability problems rising. It probably represents some crowding out. And so support for the industry is also not just support for those delinquent, but support for people dealing with a wide range of housing problems. As I mentioned, post-purchase counseling is not just for delinquency. This is just to remind us about HECM counseling and also counseling for borrowers around home maintenance and refinance decisions. Both of those types of counseling have also been growing in the last few years. HECM counseling reached 140,000 people, according to HUD's data, in 2009. So these are elderly people trying to manage their finances, and obviously reverse mortgages are an important piece of that financing puzzle. And in a time when we have more elderly entering the retirement years strapped financially, the reverse mortgage as an option for them to balance their finances is going to be ever more important, as well as the decisions around refinancing and home maintenance as well. In terms of outlook, one of the things the Joint Center does is it looks at does demographic outlooks going forward. And I think if you look both in the short term and the long term, the market conditions and the demographic forces are such that we're going to see greater demand for housing counseling. To begin with, just in terms of the short term, we are not by any means out of the woods on the foreclosure crisis. This chart shows the number of loans that are 30 days delinquent, 60 days delinquent, 90, or in foreclosure. As you can see that we have had a decline in those short-term delinquencies. 30-day delinquencies, 60-day delinquencies are coming down. And so that's the good news. We're starting to see what could be the light at the end of the tunnel. But those levels still remain very high. They're near, just slightly below where they were in 2008, which was by no means a good year to serve as a benchmark. 90-day delinquencies spiked quite a bit in 2009, but we're still back where we were a few years ago. And these borrowers in those 30, 60, 90-day buckets are the places where foreclosure counseling can really help. Borrowers in foreclosure are more than 2 million. Many of those may be too deeply in debt to be able to find a way out, but certainly may benefit from opportunities for counseling as well. So by no means is the foreclosure crisis ebbing. In terms of the longer term, what this chart shows is our projections for household growth over the next 10 years by age group. And there's two bulges. There's one bulge for those between 25, 34, and 35 to 44. This is younger households who are going to come out and be in those prime ages of both renting housing and buying first-time houses. And so over the next 10 years, we're going to see growth in those populations. People who are going to need assistance in trying to buy homes or rent homes. And certainly, given what we're happening in the mortgage market today with more tightening of underwriting standards, there will be assistance needed to help people navigate that process. The other big bulge is what's happening with the baby boom. And you can see a huge increase in households 55 to 64 and 65 to 74. Now, obviously, we're not talking about pre-purchase counseling, and hopefully we're not talking about foreclosure mitigation counseling, but reverse mortgage counseling, counseling about refinancing, counseling about home maintenance, upgrading homes in place to help people age are going to be very important issues over the next decade. This chart shows growth in the younger households by minority status, with the purple bars being minorities and the red bars being non-minorities. And one of the other fundamental facts of our demographic trends is that over the next decade, much of the growth in young households is going to be minorities. And so we're talking about trying to assist people in getting to homes. We're talking about mostly assisting minorities who have been the primary beneficiaries of counseling in the past. So again, the demographic force is going ahead. If we are going to have a housing market that's well functioning and helping the economy, we're going to have to help minority households get into home ownership. And finally, in terms of affordability, a lot of the counseling demand is driven by questions of affordability. How do I pay for the housing I have, whether I own it or I rent it? And certainly over the last 10 years, we've had a great deterioration in affordability. This chart shows increases in the absolute number of households paying more than half of their income for housing. There's been a big increase among renters. You can see those are the bottom quartile. About 2 million more renters are paying more than half their income for housing since the start of the decade. But it's also been happening to owners. There's been 1 million homeowners in the bottom quartile and nearly another 1 million in the lower middle quartile. Overall, 2.8 million owners over the past 10 years are paying more than half their income for housing. Again, in trying to manage these affordability issues, getting help and advice in terms of managing your finances and finding affordable housing solutions are going to be vital. Now, as Colleen said, the primary focus of this panel is to also look at the questions of effectiveness of counseling. Peter and Max will talk about their research on post-purchase counseling, delinquency counseling. I want to give a brief overview of what we know about pre-purchase counseling. And I would recommend a recent study by Michael Connors and Colin O'Rourke that was put out by Research Institute for Housing America, which does a very good survey of the literature of what we know. The issue is that we don't know much. And this is a question we often get is, why don't we know much? This has been an issue that's been around forever. And there are a number of really thorny challenges in trying to carry through these studies. One is that experimental designs, which are really the way to tell whether someone who got counseling and what they would have gotten if they hadn't gotten counseling, by randomly assigning people to treatment and controls, is the way to do that. In a social service organization, to take half the people and tell them that they can't get this service is really anathema. And so that has been its fundamental challenge. How do you withhold this, what you believe is a vital service to people? The other issue is that lacking a control group, that you want to do is have a fair comparison group. But who looks like the people who got counseling, but for the counseling itself? But people who get counseling are by definition different. They find their ways into a different service delivery process, a different mortgage process. And so trying to find a fair comparison group has been hard. The other challenge is that what you need to have then is link people who got counseling to what happens to their mortgage. And those are two different data sets that have been hard to link. think Peter's study will show new ways of trying to use existing large-scale databases to try to do those links, and so there may be more opportunity going forward for those types of study. And then finally, there's great diversity in what we mean by housing counseling, when it's delivered, the nature of the counseling, and the like. And so many of the studies that are out there are studies that have been done for a specific program. They're usually small. They involve one counseling agency, maybe one lender, and it's hard then to extrapolate from that to the universe as a whole. So that said, with the caveats about why it's hard to know what we know, to briefly summarize the work that's been done since the late 1990s, in general, I would say that the thrust of the literature is that to the extent that these studies do find an effect, they do find that counseling is effective in lowering delinquency rates among borrowers who buy homes. And there are also some indication that they also increase prepayment rates, which is a sign that borrowers know better about when it is a good opportunity to refinance and take advantage of those opportunities. So they're better prepared for making financial decisions around home ownership. The one study by researchers from Freddie Mac, HUD, and Zorn has been around for 10 years and has been widely cited. They found that there was a substantially lower delinquency rate, 90-day delinquency rate. One issue is that this was based on loans originated in the mid-1990s through their Affordable Gold program. The world has changed substantially since then. Most of the counseling then was delivered by lenders and by mortgage insurers. And we're looking more at a world where they're delivered by nonprofits. There was also a study by Hartarska and Gonzalez-Vega looking at a lender specifically in Ohio based, who also had lending in other parts of the country. Again, they also found support for lower levels of delinquency. There was a study by Garcia and Spader from North Carolina looking at a pool of CRA loans that did not find an impact on delinquency, but they did find that there was a tendency, more of a tendency to prepay. So like the information has not all been necessarily supportive, but it wasn't, there's one study of the ones that we looked at. And then finally, most recently, researchers at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago looking at an in-depth counseling program in Indiana also found substantial support for low delinquency rates among those who have received pre-purchase counseling. So while there's certainly a need for additional work in this area, the body of evidence that exists to date does support the fact that people who go through counseling are better prepared for meeting their financial obligations of home ownership. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name again is Peter Tatian. I'm a senior researcher at the Urban Institute, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about this work. I've made this presentation a few times now in different contexts, but I love talking about this study because it's been a very great study to work on, both from an intellectual point of view as a researcher, very challenging, but also because the topic is so important and very timely. And also because we have been able to demonstrate that foreclosure counseling has had very positive impacts for folks. And that's a great story to tell. And the words positive and foreclosure don't often end up in the same sentence. So that's really nice that we can do that. And I wanted to start by saying that I don't think, and for many in the room, maybe it seems a little obvious that counseling is a positive benefit for people, but I think that there are good reasons to think at the beginning that maybe we wouldn't be able to find positive benefits. Maybe the folks who come for foreclosure counseling are just too far gone and too much in trouble, and so there's not much you can do to help them. Maybe there just aren't solutions out there to help people get into a better position to be able to pay their mortgage. So, I don't think it was obvious from the start that we were going to find these positive outcomes that we're finding. So I do want to put that out there as well. This slide may be a little unnecessary for this group, but just quickly to make sure we're all familiar. What we're doing is evaluating the National Foreclosure Mitigation Counseling Program, or NFMC program, which was a special federal appropriation that's administered by NeighborWorks America. Over $415 million provided to rapid expansion of the foreclosure counseling system. And so really this is, with Making Home Affordable, the big federal effort to deal with the foreclosure crisis. And so there's a lot of, obviously in the press, you hear a lot about Making Home Affordable and the HAMP program. You don't hear much about NFMC, but really NFMC is one of the pillars of what the federal government has tried to do in terms of responding to foreclosure. So a very important program. Since January 2008, over 1 million homeowners have received NFMC counseling. And as part of the legislation establishing the program, Congress required that an independent evaluation be done of the NFMC program. Urban Institute competed against some other firms for the rights to do that evaluation. We were selected by NeighborWorks in 2008 to do the evaluation. Our evaluation is focused on the first 2 rounds of NFMC funding, so people who got counseling basically in 2008 and 2009. And we've issued a couple of preliminary reports. The evaluation is still going on. We're working now on our final report, which will come out this fall. But we have issued a couple of preliminary reports, and so I'm going to be talking about our latest findings. But there will be some more information coming out, and I can talk a little at the end about what to expect there. But in this part of the evaluation, we focused on a number of outcomes that we wanted to see if counseling, we could show whether counseling has a positive effect on these outcomes for homeowners. And so there were 3 that we focused on in our last analysis. 1, does the NFMC program help homeowners cure an existing foreclosure? In other words, you're in foreclosure, in the foreclosure process. Does counseling help you get out of that foreclosure process without going to a foreclosure sale or a foreclosure auction and losing your home? So it doesn't mean that you're going to stay out of trouble forever. You might end up back in foreclosure, but at least you were able to get out at this point and get yourself in a slightly better position. Secondly, we wanted to look at loan modifications because we recognize that this is one of the main solutions that's being proposed for folks, to give them a loan modification that makes their mortgage affordable for them. And we particularly wanted to focus on whether loan modifications resulted in lower monthly payments for the borrowers. As some of you probably remember from the beginning of the foreclosure crisis, there was a lot of talk about loan modifications not being successful, people getting mods and then getting back into delinquency again. But if you look at some of those earlier mods, a lot of them involved re-amortizing arrears and penalties and fees, and maybe tacking on a few more years on the loan, so not necessarily resulting in a lower monthly payment. In fact, it might have even resulted in a higher monthly payment. So we really wanted to focus on mods that resulted in lower monthly payments, so that's why we looked at this outcome in particular. And finally, our third outcome was looking at the sustainability question. So if you're getting help that results in a cure of a serious delinquency or foreclosure, are you able then, is the homeowner able then to remain current on their mortgage over time, and does counseling affect that outcome as well? To look at these outcomes, so I'm, in the interest of time, I'm skipping a lot of the methodological discussion, which I'm sure is a relief to many in the audience. So if you want to look at our report, we have lots of equations and all kinds of wonderful things in there that you can pore over. Just in brief, I'll tell you that we've used, as Chris mentioned, you know, obviously one way to do evaluation is experimental design, but that's not how the NFMC program was set up. What we're doing is using statistical methods to try to see what these impacts are. We have data, a sample of homeowners who received NFMC counseling that we're using, and then we were able to select statistically a comparison group that looks a lot like those homeowners on a number of characteristics, including race, ethnicity, income, type of mortgage, and so forth. And so we use that as a comparison group in our statistical models so that we can measure the difference between people who get counseling and people who do not. Okay, so let's look at our first outcome, which is foreclosure cures. What this graph shows is the overall cure rate for a set of loans over time. So looking over a 12-month period, if you start off with a group of loans who are in foreclosure, people who are in foreclosure, how many of them have a successful foreclosure cure after so many months? So the red line at the top represents people who get counseling, a typical loan who gets counseling, and the blue line represents a similar loan, similar set of loans for people, but those people don't get counseling. So as you can see from this chart, over the 12-month period, the group of loans in foreclosure who get counseling, we would expect over half of them, 55%, after those 12 months to have a successful foreclosure cure. In comparison, if you don't get counseling, the cure rate is only 38% over that period. So that difference between the 55 and the 38, that's the impact of the counseling on foreclosure cure. So that's a really sizable impact. I mean, you don't often see, again, you know, for folks who maybe aren't familiar with research on these kinds of programs, seeing an impact of that size is actually pretty substantial. So that is a very positive and significant impact of counseling. Our second outcome was looking at the loan modifications again and whether the loan modification results in a lower monthly payment. So in this analysis, what we're looking at was, does counseling lower the payment more than what you would get if you got the modification on your own without the help of a counselor? So this first number up here, under any counseling, $267 is the average amount of payment reduction that's in addition that counseling provides as a benefit. So people who get counseling have a monthly payment from a loan modification that's $267 lower on average than folks who get modifications without without the help of a counselor. So that's a rather, again, I think a rather sizable amount. $267 per month is a pretty good amount to have in your pocket. I know some discussion we were having with other folks this morning has talked about, you know, the value overall of counseling and can we quantify that. So if you wanted to take this as an example, just to do a simple calculation, there's about 700,000 or so homeowners who got counseling in the first 2 rounds of NFMC. About 18% of them got loan modifications. So if you multiply this out, 700,000 times 18% times $267, that's about $34 million a month that counseling has saved homeowners who went through the NFMC program. So, and that's just one, you know, piece of it. So we're going to try in our final report to have a little bit more of those kinds of big numbers or you know, cost benefit kinds of calculations as well. The other numbers on the slide, the 214, 265, 335, show the different effects based on the level of counseling. Again, for those not familiar with NMFC, level counseling refers to the level of service that the counselors provide. In level 1, it's basically a one-time interaction with the client, and they work out a plan for the client, but then the client has to go off and implement that themselves. In level 2, the counselor actually helps the client to implement the plan. Maybe it's, you know, doing a phone call with the counselor or so forth. And in level 3, they do both of those together. So we do see the size of the benefit goes up with the levels of counseling. We did look at that for the other outcomes. We don't always see the difference with the levels of counseling for the other outcomes. Okay. So our third outcome was the sustainability of cures. So here we're starting with folks who are in serious delinquency, 3 months or more, or foreclosure, and they get a loan modification that brings them to current. Okay, so the loan modification brings their loan to where they're not in arrears anymore on the mortgage, and then we look and see, do they fall back into delinquency or foreclosure at some point in the future. So again, the red line represents the folks who get the loan modification and cure with the help of a counselor, and the blue line represents those who do not, and we're looking over time at how many of them redefault. So over the 8-month period that we are observing, you can see that 64% of the counseled borrowers would be remaining current after that 8-month period versus only 51% of those who didn't get counseling. So again, a sizable benefit for the counseled folks. Now, I always kind of say this is like the glass half full, glass half empty slide because yes, there is a positive benefit for the counseling, but still about a third of the borrowers are falling back into trouble 8 months later, which is obviously not what we'd all like to see. So I think there's a lot of, we could maybe talk more in the discussion about why that is the case, but I think it basically speaks to some of the difficulties that people are facing now and the multitude of problems that they're having to overcome. On the sustainability conclusions, I wanted to make you know, a couple of points about those because they were really you know, a very interesting part of what we've learned about the program. Part of the outcome that we're seeing, the positive outcome in terms of sustaining cures, is because of the lower monthly mortgage payments that borrowers receive. So again, you know, with counseling help, you can get a lower monthly payment. Obviously, having a lower monthly payment makes it more likely you're going to stay current. But in fact, what we found was that the sustainability result we're seeing is bigger than what you would expect just from that monthly payment reduction. So it's not only the fact they get a lower monthly payment. There's something else that counseling is providing that is helping those borrowers remain current. And so we don't know exactly what that is from the quantitative data, but we have done interviews with counselors and talked to them. And so we really think that what's likely is that the kind of financial education counseling, the budgeting, the other services that counselors provide, and in some cases financial assistance in some parts of the country. For example, in Pennsylvania, there's money available to help people, so that could be contributing as well. That those things actually have a bigger impact than even the payment reduction. So this is just speaking again to, the value of counseling goes beyond just the mechanics of negotiating a loan modification. It goes to a lot of the other things that counselors are providing as services to their clients as well. Okay, so that's the basics of what we've found. So thank you for your attention, and be happy to answer questions later.
All right, so I'm Max Schmeiser from the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and since I work for the Federal Reserve, I have to give the usual disclaimer that the views I'm expressing here are my own and not those of the board or the system. So this is just a quick summary of some research I've been doing for several years on foreclosure counseling. And if you're interested in the nitty-gritty details, the econometric methods, and so on, feel free to just Google the title of the paper, and I'm sure you'll have no trouble finding a version of a working paper online. So I think Peter and Chris have done a great job of motivating why we're interested in foreclosure counseling. I think there's no doubt that there's a very big need for foreclosure counseling at the moment. And I just wanted to put up this slide. This is the latest data from the Federal Reserve as of April 2011. This is the distribution of seriously delinquent or borrowers who are in foreclosure across the nation. And not surprising, well, perhaps surprising, most of Florida, greater than 8% of mortgages are currently seriously delinquent or in foreclosure, Southern California, parts of the Midwest, and the Northeast as well. And so all the hot spots you'd expect are in red, so greater than 8% of mortgages currently seriously delinquent. So at the start of this crisis, as Peter was mentioning, we devoted a huge amount of funding to foreclosure mitigation counseling. Now, this was done without solid evidence about its effectiveness. And this was primarily due to the fact that prior to the recession, as Chris pointed out, there was limited provision of foreclosure counseling. It just wasn't really needed. You could potentially sell your home in order to get out of a difficult situation. And so we didn't have a lot of data to evaluate this program. However, several years on, we now have a significant amount of data on foreclosures, on counseling, and on outcomes post-counseling. We also have observations after a modification has occurred, so we can follow borrowers who received counseling and didn't receive counseling as they move past a modification. Now, one thing you may be wondering is, well, how is it that counseling makes such a big difference? So both Peter and I are going to mention big figures in terms of how counseling has had a positive impact on borrowers. Well, why is that? Why is it that just going to speak with someone makes such a big difference? Well, what the counselors do is they can help you diagnose your payment problem. They're going to help you create a budget. They're going to go through your income. They're going to help you cut expenses. So they're potentially going to provide financial education, financial assistance, financial planning in a way that you simply can't do on your own. A lot of these borrowers who come in are not able to do this themselves. They're also going to help you sort of prioritize your debts, your debt repayment. They may also help you to maximize your potential income by enrolling you in programs, for example, food stamps that can help boost your income, free up money to pay for mortgages. And then they can help you form repayment strategies, and this could include getting a mortgage modification to reduce your payment or selling the home if that's at all possible. Now, further reasons why individuals can't necessarily do this themselves is that a lot of these mortgages are very complex contracts the targeted populations just don't have a good grasp of, don't know how to work through. Moreover, the modification process itself has become very complex and frustrating, and the counselors, given that this is what they do from day to day, they have a lot of experience working with the various servicers and lenders, they know how to navigate this system. It also may be that the borrowers themselves don't know about public programs or private programs that may be available to help assist them with their mortgage payments. And so, again, the counselor, knowing about these programs, can provide this information to the borrower. And in times of distress, times of financial distress, a lot of times people, their judgment can be clouded by the simple stress of dealing with these situations. Having a third party who they can go to, they trust, they can talk to about these issues, that alone can actually help significantly in terms of their ability to cope with these problems. But obviously there's limitations to counseling. If you don't have income, or your income has been substantially reduced, you simply can't make a mortgage payment. That's not going to help. Moreover, the quality and availability of counseling are also uneven. There's a wide range of counselors, quality of counselors, and also given the sheer need for foreclosure counseling, a lot of people have been pressed into service with limited experience in counseling. And so the research I've been doing has examined the effect of mortgage default counseling on borrower outcomes, and specifically I'm looking at the receipt of a modification and whether their home goes to REO. And I've attempted to control for the selection into counseling. As Peter mentioned, there are differences in the types of borrowers, or Chris mentioned, the differences in the types of borrowers who show up for counseling versus those who don't show up for counseling. And we have to do things to control for this issue. We can't simply compare these two groups and look at the difference. Now, one thing I'm also going to do is examine whether the timing of when you receive counseling affects your outcome. That is, if you show up when you're current, does it matter more, or if you show up 30 days delinquent, 60 days delinquent, 90+ days delinquent, your outcomes vary depending on when you show up. And lastly, I'm also going to look at the parameters of modifications for those who receive counseling versus those who do not. And then lastly, looking at long-term outcomes for borrowers who receive modifications with and without counseling. So the data I'm using is a combination of data from the Homeownership Preservation Foundation's HOPE hotline, which they graciously provided, and also merging this data with data from the Corporate Trust Services database that Wells Fargo maintains on its securitized mortgages that it services. And these combined data give us several million observations on mortgages over time. So we have a single mortgage, and we follow that over time, allowing us to track the performance of the mortgage pre- and post-counseling. So some of you may be wondering, well, when do people show up for counseling? And it's actually quite surprising, at least I was surprised when I first saw these figures. About half of borrowers show up when they're current for their first counseling sessions. That is, these people call, they realize they're going to be in trouble soon, they call ahead of time. And then you also have about a third of borrowers who call when they're 90+ days delinquent. That is, they basically get a foreclosure notice and they realize, oh, I should probably do something about this. And so they contact a counselor. So just looking at borrowers or counseled borrowers in general, it's going to provide you a biased picture of things because there's a big difference in terms of who shows up. You have to control for when they show up because they do have different outcomes, as I'll soon show you. So here, I'm not sure what color that is, red, I guess. The red bars show you the effect of counseling on receipt of a mortgage modification for those who received counseling versus those who did not. So for those who received it when they were current, about a 10 percentage point increase in the probability of receiving a modification. For those who received it at 30 days delinquent, it goes up to about 15 percentage point increase. At 60+ days, 14 percentage point increase, and then it drops down once you get to 90+ days delinquent, as you'd probably expect given that these borrowers are more distressed, down to about 7 percentage point increase. Now, they still perform better than borrowers who do not receive counseling, but again, showing up later counseling seems to have less of an effect. The yellow bars represent the effect on an REO, and again, you see a reduction in the probability of the home going to REO or the mortgage going to REO. And again, at 30 and 60 days plus delinquent, you see these large effects on the order of 7 percentage points versus 2.5 when they're current and about 3 percentage points when they're 90+ days delinquent. So again, there seems to be this sweet spot in the 30, 60 days delinquent period where counseling really makes a difference. In terms of the receipt of loan modifications and the parameters of those modifications, we find that borrowers who receive counseling get about $110 in a lower monthly payment on average versus those who do not receive counseling but have the same sort of parameters for their loan, demographic characteristics, and so on. They also seem to get slightly lower interest rates, about 5 basis points relative to uncounseled borrowers. And then following modification, counseled borrowers do seem to perform better than uncounseled borrowers. We get about a 0.6 percentage point lower probability of subsequent REO and a 0.2 percentage point lower probability of redefault. Now, I realize these figures, these percentage points or percentage points seem small, but given the number of people who go to REO or redefault, it's actually a significant percentage. So just to sort of summarize what I've been saying, counseling consistently increases the probability of receiving a loan modification. So on average, you get about a 10 percentage point or a 200% increase relative to uncounseled borrowers in the probability of receiving a modification. Getting counseling reduces the probability of your mortgage going to REO. Approximately 4 percentage points on average, about 150% reduction relative to uncounseled borrowers. What I seem to be showing is that delinquency status, that is when you show up for counseling, really does matter in terms of your outcome. And again, as I said before, seems to be the best effect on those in the 30 to 60-day delinquent period. You might expect this given that maybe a borrower or servicers or lenders are more likely to negotiate with you once you're delinquent. If you show up when you're current, they're less likely to do something for you. You show up 30, 60 days delinquent, they're more likely to do something. Show up 90 plus days delinquent, there's a lot fewer options in terms of what they can do to mitigate your chances of going to REO or get you a modification. Now, among borrowers receiving loan modifications, those who receive counseling are significantly less likely to subsequently lose their home to REO than uncounseled borrowers. And this is likely due to the fact that they simply receive better terms on their loans. If you have a lower monthly payment, better interest rates, you're more likely to keep making those payments. Now, I just want to reemphasize that counseling across all sorts of studies, so my study, Peter's study, and then numerous other studies, it shows a positive effect. In fact, I've yet to see a study that shows a negative effect of counseling on borrowers. They near universally show some kind of positive effect of counseling on borrower outcomes. But again, we need to keep in mind that no amount of counseling is going to solve fundamental problems like a significant reduction in income, a lack of income, and so on. So if you don't have the money to meet mortgage obligations, obviously counseling is going to help. But in general, counseling seems to have a very strong positive effect. All right. Thank you very much.
Council on Aging. And I'm here today to talk with you about a rather different form of counseling assistance. What we've heard has really focused on foreclosure counseling, the need to preserve the ability to own that home. We've also heard the fact that home ownership is absolutely critical as a source of wealth building for Americans. And the reason that this is so critical is because there comes a point in life where the wealth that you have built up becomes a critical resource to sustain a person during their retirement years. And that's here where reverse mortgage counseling comes in. HECMs, just for you who don't know, stands for Home Equity Conversion Mortgage, and that is the name of the HUD FHA-insured reverse mortgage program. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today because counseling is a critical component of the HECM program. I'd like to start from a slightly different place than homeowners in distress. I think what we're seeing among seniors who are homeowners is a new reality, and that is the new retirement reality that they are facing. Because of many challenges we're seeing, home equity is becoming an increasingly critical component of retirement security and as being viewed more as a retirement resource. And there's several reasons why this is the case. First of all, there's growing financial insecurity because of stock market volatility, because people are not getting the kinds of return on their investments, the low interest rates, and because the number of older people who have some kind of a defined benefit pension plan is declining, and more people are having to rely on the money that they have themselves have saved through 401ks and IRAs, and clearly people are not saving enough. So if you don't have enough money saved in retirement, how are you going to make ends meet? And for many people, it is home equity. In fact, for a very substantial portion of older Americans, home equity is their most significant source of savings. So the question is, how can you tap that equity wisely? And that's where the the HECM counseling comes into play. At the same time that people are struggling in terms of making ends meet in retirement, they're also facing the prospect that they're going to be living longer in retirement, which is a great blessing, but also a very new challenge that many people have to face. And we're not necessarily prepared to do that based on sort of what we might have seen with our parents and grandparents living longer. So there's a risk of outliving our retirement funds. And again, as you live longer, there's a greater chance that you're going to develop some kind of a serious health problem or chronic condition that will eat up those resources even faster. And again, the need to tap home equity becomes more critical. We're also seeing generational change. In the past, the vast majority of people entered into retirement with their homes paid off. In fact, burning the mortgage. People used to have mortgage burning parties in days gone by where that was the big life transition as you were heading into retirement. But those days are over. And in fact, we're seeing that over a third of people aged 65 and older today still have a mortgage in retirement. And some of them can be expect to be paying those mortgage payments until their 80s. So this is not adding up. And it's, again, even just within the last 10 years, there's been a dramatic shift from 24% to 35%. This is a very dramatic change in terms of behavior. Of course, we know that mortgage scams and other kinds of scams typically target seniors, and we're beginning to see that too. The Homeowners Hope Hotline, the folks who are calling into those, 45% of them are age 51 or older and reporting that they're victim of a mortgage scam. So clearly there is a need for additional assistance in this age group to make sure that they make wise decisions. And of course, for those who do need to rely on public programs, we know that the resources for those kinds of programs are shrinking, and so there's a much greater need for people to rely on their own resources to solve their problems. And again, all that adds up to the fact that people are having to tap home equity. Basically, it's no longer a question of if people are going to be tapping their equity in retirement, but it's a question of when and how. And HECM counseling is an important part to make sure that people can make wise decisions. Within this framework of the new retirement reality, we have to think differently about the role of reverse mortgages. Traditionally, they've been seen as a last resort for elderly widows who had no other opportunity and were just trying to eke by. I think that reality has changed, and if we look at the kinds of folks who are coming in as reverse mortgage counseling clients these days, we can see there's a very widespread of different types of folks, and they reflect many different challenges that they're facing these days. About 2/3 of them are coming in these days with a desire to reduce their debt. Many of them have a monthly mortgage payment that they can no longer pay, and they want to put that into a reverse mortgage, because the way the reverse mortgage works is you can take the equity of your home to pay off the existing mortgage and defer that payment until you leave the house. So that provides additional protection against foreclosure for those whose incomes are limited or have declined for some reason. Over 40% of people who come in for reverse mortgage counseling have incomes below 200% of poverty. Clearly, those people because of their limited resources, need additional assistance to make sure that they make a wise decision about whether to tap their equity and how it might help them to stay at home for many years. Over 40% also are married, which may not seem as a risk factor when you think about tapping home equity. But again, if you have two spouses and you use up all your equity paying for today's needs, you may not have much money left over for tomorrow's needs, especially if there's one spouse that's left after one spouse passes away. So clearly, there's a lot of thinking and strategizing that needs to be done as to when you tap that equity and how that might affect a remaining spouse. Surprisingly, we think of reverse mortgages as something that's for very elderly people. The average age of taking out this kind of loan has declined dramatically over the last 10 years. Right now, the average age is around 72. But if you were to look at the sort of the typical person who might walk through to the door today and apply for one of these loans, the typical age of what the person you might see is actually age 62. It's people in their 60s who are actually most interested in these loans right now, oftentimes because they're facing this overwhelming debt because they have not yet prepared adequately for retirement. It's a very different world out there. Health limitations, again, people who have those kinds of needs and are looking at tapping their equity, they need specialized counseling to make sure that they understand that the home may not be the best place for them, and perhaps a reverse mortgage may not be appropriate for them. And that takes additional kinds of assistance and guidance. Similarly, 1 out of 10 people who are interested in a reverse mortgage are already on public benefits. And how those public benefits fit with a reverse mortgage has to be carefully examined, because if people don't do it right, they could lose access to those benefits. So clearly, reverse mortgage counseling has to deal with a lot of different issues, and that is in fact what counselors do as part of the counseling they provide. Another unique aspect of reverse mortgage counseling is the fact that it is mandated by HUD. There's no other loan where you need to go through consumer counseling before you can actually apply for the loan. And of course, given the challenges we're facing in terms of paying for this becomes pretty critical. Right now, about 99% of all reverse mortgages are FHA insured HECM loans, and it's the FHA insured HECM that requires counseling. The rule is that lenders cannot charge clients until they receive a counseling certificate from their client. So if there's no counseling, there's no reverse mortgage marketplace right now. There's been tremendous improvements in counseling in the last several years. Counselors have to be registered on a roster. They have to go through training. They have to pass a very difficult exam. So the quality of this counseling has really dramatically improved. In addition, the kinds of materials that counselors give to older homeowners is very diverse, and again provides them with a wealth of information that help them to make informed decisions. They have to get a Use Your Home to Stay at Home booklet, which we developed at NCOA, which looks at various different strategies for staying at home. They get amortization, loan comparison tables, which help them look at the cost of this counseling and how it might accumulate over time, and is customized so that they can see what it might be for their own lives. Critical information for making a decision about what can be a very complex loan. In addition, a new development as of September is that all clients must go through a financial interview review. And what that does, counselors ask their clients 24 questions that go beyond the loan. It has to do with the life of the borrower. For example, have they recently been widowed? Because, of course, many people who go through a widowhood or divorce oftentimes find that they don't want to continue to stay in their current house. And for them, a reverse mortgage may not be appropriate. Do they live in a home with barriers? Do they have health problems? These kinds of issues that look more broadly at the life of the borrower and not just the life of the loan. And all this is required as part of HECM counseling. In addition, a new development is that, all clients must be offered a benefits checkup analysis. And those with incomes under 200% of poverty must go through a benefits checkup analysis. Just a quick check. How many of you here know what a benefits checkup is? Yay. All right. Well, good. I'm going to take the bully pulpit for a minute here. It is, I recommend that you all go out to benefitscheckup.org on the web and check out this great website. It's sponsored by the National Council on the Aging. And what it does is it allows people to assess their eligibility for public programs. So you enter in your own income, information, your age, and what it does is it scours over 2,500 benefit programs across the country and in states and communities, and allows people to check to see whether or not they may be eligible for supplemental security income, Medicaid, food stamps, prescription drug benefits, all of which can reduce their expenses and potentially give them alternatives to taking out a reverse mortgage, or perhaps additional resources that can supplement a reverse mortgage so that they don't have to draw down that equity so fast and have something left over at the end of the day. So clearly, reverse mortgage counseling, HECM counseling, provides a real broad source of information that really helps inform decision making. The other thing that counselors are now required to do, which again is very unique, is that they have to ask each client 10 questions to check whether they understand what they've learned during a counseling session. Very basic questions in terms of, do you know who owns the home if you have a reverse mortgage and things like that, just basic comprehension. And actually the counselors, if the client doesn't demonstrate some basic knowledge, they can actually withhold the counseling certificate, which means that a person cannot actually apply for a reverse mortgage. These are critical and unique consumer protections that we at NCOA feel are absolutely valuable in making sure that seniors are protected when it comes to making this very critical decision. In terms of outcomes, clearly, the outcome of a reverse mortgage counseling session isn't to take out a reverse mortgage or not to take out a reverse mortgage, but rather to make a wise decision. And there are many ways in which HICM counseling supports decision-making. As part of mandatory, and this is HUD mandated counseling, they have to talk about the client goals. They have to discuss the budget shortfalls. They have to look at life factors. The counselors discuss different types of reverse mortgages and their features. They talk about the loan costs and how they can change or accumulate over time, and other options. So clearly very broad decision support, which is critical in deciding whether this loan may or may not be appropriate for an individual. I think ultimately the question here is one of sustainability. I think that's perhaps the best measure of outcome with this kind of counseling is, are people as a result of this counseling able to sustain themselves in the home? And while we don't have a lot of long-term data because this is a relatively new product, there are ways in which we can judge this. First of all, we know from some of the data that's being collected through counseling that over 40% of clients are people with modest incomes. And the chances of them being able to get the kind of financial advice that more affluent people get is small. So reverse mortgage counseling represents a unique teachable moment to reach out to middle-income families and lower-income families so that they get this kind of financial advice that they need. Secondly, we've discovered that only just in the last 6 months or so since the September when the mandate became in effect, that over 38,000 HICM counseling clients have actually gone through one of these benefits checkup screenings to see whether they might qualify for benefits. And that's about half of all of the counseling clients have now had their horizons broadened. And we found that 88% of them were found to be eligible for at least one benefit. And of those, if you were to add up, if all those clients were to apply and receive all of those benefits for which they may be eligible, the potential value of those benefits could be close to $197 million. So again, this brings a new resource, additional resource into their lives that could either be an alternative or a supplement to tapping home equity through a reverse mortgage. And again, we see this as sort of a foundation for a public-private approach. If people tap their equity, they can also combine that with benefits to maximize their ability to stay at home. Again, thinking more broadly within the broader retirement context, this kinds of counseling not just addresses their immediate budget shortfalls, but also helps them to think about their long-term challenges for aging in place. And I think that's where we really need additional guidance, because we're all in uncharted waters when it comes to trying to use our own resources to retire successfully. It's challenging. So it's very important to help think strategically about the use of this asset. That's what reverse mortgage counseling does. And also, I think increasingly we're starting to focus on discussing exit strategies so people don't just think about the benefit of the loan up front, but how they're going to be able to move through their life and ultimately leave that house, and particularly in a way that they don't increase their foreclosure risk. A lot of value here, very important, which is why we think it's critical that we continue to fund this type of counseling. Obviously, that one of the challenges for us is that HICM counseling has been defunded as part of the overall housing counseling program that was defunded recently. We're very concerned about that for quite a few reasons. First of all, as we know, many of the people who are considering these loans are cash poor, and having to pay additional fees for counseling is just one more burden on them. And again, we have to remember that this counseling is mandated, so anybody who wants these loans will likely have to pay these fees. And their lenders are legally prohibited from paying for counseling. That is seen as a consumer protection, but of course puts the burden then on seniors. We're also very concerned that if seniors start having to pay for this kind of counseling, then they're going to wait until they're in a crisis before they think about getting information. We've heard that many people wait until they're in a crisis to deal with housing issues. So we want to make sure that seniors talk with a HECM counselor before they face a financial crisis, because that's when the possibility for a solution seems greater and for them to make wise decisions. The other thing that we've been advocating very strongly, and we've been partnering with the Administration on Aging to promote this through area agencies on aging, is to encourage older homeowners to talk with a counselor before they talk to a lender. Because oftentimes by the time they talk to the lender, they will have been convinced of a certain product or or maybe that this is the right choice for them, when in fact it may not be, or there may be another product that some variation of a HICM that might be better for them. So clearly, if they have to pay up front, there's less likelihood that they will take that initiative, and we feel that this is a huge missed opportunity that we have today. Of course, if everybody starts charging for counseling, there's a good chance that there's going to be rogue agencies who are not HUD approved, who are going to be out there offering counseling seniors won't know, and there's much greater risk of scams that way too if there's no free or low-cost counseling. And finally, I think as was pointed out, many agencies, the smaller agencies, rely on HUD funding to provide this kind of counseling, and if there's no funding available, then they will have to stop offering this counseling. And since these agencies are often located in the communities, there's much less opportunity for face-to-face counseling. So truly an important service that's being provided to vulnerable seniors is working. It's making a huge difference in these people's lives, and we'd like to see it continue. Thank you.